former CIA director and retired four-star General David Petraeus. He also served as commander of U.S. Central Command, which includes part of the Middle East. Director Petraeus, thanks for joining us. What's your assessment of the attack by Iran? Was this a genuine attempt to retaliate, to overwhelm Israel's defenses, to cause mass damage? Or was this a show of force for Iran, but indicating that they don't want actually to escalate further?
I think it was probably a bit more of the latter than the former. Clearly, it was unprecedented. There never has been an attack that came from Iranian soil. And of course, these attacks also included some of the proxies in Iraq and Syria and southern Lebanon. There's never been something like this in the past, but it seemed a little bit less than what they might have thrown if they were really serious. In fact, it was probably a good bit less than if they really wanted to cause massive damage. It struck me as a little bit like that attack the Iranians did after the U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani in Baghdad that time. They telegraphed it well in advance, and again, no casualties out of that one. And in this case, at most, it appears that there was one Arab-Israeli girl who was seriously injured and may have died. So there's a tiny bit of this Goldilocks aspect to this, I think, although, again, a very significant attack.
Iran and Israel have been fighting this shadow war in the Middle East for decades now. This is the first time that Iran has directly attacked Israel from inside Iranian territory, not using proxies like Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis. Just how significant a moment is this for the Middle East?
Well, it is significant. It's a very big deal. And I think Israel will have to take some action in response. I think it's very clear that the U.S. would like to see that be as limited as is possible. Keep in mind that the real issue here, in addition to Israel's security, of course, which is first and foremost, but it's also about freedom of navigation from the Gulf for the oil and gas that come from the Gulf and fuel much of the global economy. That's the biggest issue here. And Iran, I don't think, wants to have that disrupted either, because they export about 1.6 or 1.7 million barrels a day themselves. So keep your eye on that. Brent crude is already above $90 a barrel, and it would really spike if there was something that interfered with freedom of navigation. In fact, we need to figure out what's going on. Iran did take a ship the other day that they claimed was in some way dealing with Israel. But this is another step up the rung of escalation. I think it's in the interest of everyone to stop the increasing escalation, but we'll have to see what Israel decides to do in this case.
President Biden told Prime Minister Netanyahu that the United States will not participate in any offensive strikes by Israel against Iran. How would you advise Israel to respond to this? How worried are you that any response will only throw fuel on the fire?
Well, that has to be a concern, and I'm sure they're conscious of that, Jake. There's the whole menu of actions that they can take, not all of which are necessarily overt. They can pursue covert, they can pursue asymmetric attacks, cyberspace, and so forth. And keep in mind that, of course, Washington is meeting with the other G7 countries to determine what kind of diplomatic and economic responses should follow in a coordinated effort as well. Can't really take your eye off Gaza, though. At the end of the day, got to get those hostages back. And I believe still do need to destroy Hamas. You don't send the fire department to extinguish 80% of the fire. They still have work to do there.
All right, General Petraeus, always good to see you. Thank you so much for your insights. Joining us now, the former director of national intelligence under President Obama, retired General James Clapper. So, first of all, just the size and scope of this. We've never seen anything quite like this in terms of Iran directly launching attack on Israel. So it does seem to mark a change, an inflection point of some sort, yes?
Oh, no question, Jake, that a Rubicon has been crossed here with Iran directly attacking from Iran proper to Israel proper. That said, though, the size of the attack, I think, was very measured. It did not I think the Iranians had to know that it would not overwhelm the coalition air defense system. And then at the end of it, they declared it was done without having accomplished much in the way of damage. So I think there was a messaging here, but I still believe, despite this very profound event, that the Iranians don't want a wider war, as strange as that may seem.
Well, so explain to people at home who think, or they're saying, General Clapper, how can you say they don't want a wider war? They just fired 300 attack drones and missiles at Israel. But you think that the way they did it is significant.
Well, I do, because first they telegraphed it. They sent slow-moving drones out first, which you had hours to prepare for. And the Iranians have a lot of missiles, ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. So if they had wanted to, I believe they could have overwhelmed the Israeli air defense system and that of the coalition, which was very important. I guess 20% or so of the projectiles were neutralized by U.S. or other coalition elements. So the whole way they went about this, I think, was very deliberate, very measured. I don't think they want a wider war. And of course, now it's all up to the Israelis.
So the United States does not have an embassy in Iran. Iran doesn't have an embassy in the United States. You think that this information, about a week ago maybe, or maybe a little bit less, the Biden administration started announcing or leaking to newspapers, there's intelligence that Iran is going to attack Israel. You think it's possible that Iran leaked that intentionally?
I think it's quite possible. They may have conveyed it to us. I think they probably weren't all that careful about masking their preparation. The fact that President Biden came back from Delaware early, convened the national security team, all these things tell me that we had good insight into what the Iranians were going to do. And
so why do it? So why would they do it?
Well, I think the Iranians have their own domestic political pressures. There are some very hard liners now surrounding the supreme leader. So I think they had that constituency to placate. And the fact that they showed the parade, if you will, of celebratory parade in Tehran, the joyful Iranians so happy about the attack. And I think that's what was important to the Iranians. And I still believe they don't want a wider war, as incongruous as that may sound.
But their proxies are doing things that are not meant to be eliminated. Their proxies, Hamas, slaughtering 1,200 Israelis, Hezbollah firing rockets into the north of Israel, so as tens of thousands of Israelis can't even live in their homes. The Houthis shutting down coastal passages, ocean passages. So that seems incongruous too.
It does, and I think that raises the question: is just how much control Iran actually has over the proxies. I think they have their own objectives, and they're going to try to fulfill them. And in the case of, particularly in the case of Hezbollah, well, this is a great opportunity for them to weigh in and increase the attacks from southern Lebanon into northern Israel. So, this is not a rosy picture for Iran either. I'll put it that way.
All right. Retired General James Clapper, former Director of National Intelligence, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.